Obviously, the elite people want to keep us as ignorant and fighting amongst ourselves as we possibly can. And create all sorts of stupid issues like whether or not transgender people can use bathrooms, and getting people riled up about nonsense to keep the working people from uniting together against the oligarchs. And so I generally look at what used to be the fourth estate as now it's just another arm of the oligarchy. And the actual fourth estate, which are the people out on the fringe, like the gray zone journalists and, like Abby Martin and Eva Bartlett. And you've got there are good journalists in the world, but they're kept from having the size platform that they would need to reach most people in this country.
So hello and welcome to another episode of Chatter. Today, I'm talking to Jen Perelman, who ran against Debbie Wasserman Schultz in the latest congressional race and is host of the podcast JENerational Change. Jen, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me on.
No problem. So we are here to talk about Julian Assange and the assault on freedom of speech and our civil liberties at the moment. So do you want to maybe start by giving like a little overview of like the Assange case, just for anyone listening who isn't like intimately familiar with the details of his case?
Sure. So in general, Julian Assange is a publisher, creator, founder of WikiLeaks. And I'm going to speak as to the reason why he is supposedly being prosecuted now. Let me talk about like that first. So he is currently being prosecuted for what they believe under the United States Espionage Act. I could get into how weird this is that a foreign national can be tried under that, but okay. For releasing information and giving information to the media that demonstrated how the United States military was killing civilians. And there have been several WikiLeaks stories, but the one that he is currently being prosecuted, or that the United States is seeking to extradite on, is where at that time, Bradley Manning, now Chelsea Manning, who was in the military, gave Julian Assange, or gave WikiLeaks, information that showed video footage of our military, of our soldiers gunning down civilians knowingly. This is something that came out. Oh my God, what was the year? You're going to have to remind me. I want to say,
I think it was from 2005.
It was around that. And so our government is trying to show that he actually is the one who broke into and hacked into the system to get the information. And that's just not true. So that's the technical legal thing that he's being sought on. But what he's really being sought on is embarrassing the Clintons and a whole bunch of other people in our Democratic Party in 2016. And that is why this has been the witch hunt against Julian Assange.
I mean, the case was, he was already making waves, shall we say, before that with WikiLeaks, as you mentioned,
yes,
when he was revealing those videos of the US soldiers in Iraq. And one of the things that we mentioned we were going to talk about is that the kind of wider implications of his case are that there is certain information that, like the ruling class or the establishment, or however you want to describe it, decide that we are maybe not party to seeing, that we don't deserve or shouldn't see. And he's being pursued, at least in my mind, because he's decided to tell the truth. And that's a pretty scary place to be at in 2021.
Yeah. I don't know what your founding documents are where, in Ireland, but in this country, what we're doing is a complete violation of the First Amendment, And I have been saying this for the better part of 10 years, that the prosecution, if they are successfully able to prosecute Julian Assange for printing and releasing the truth, that is the end of our First Amendment. It's gone. That's it. So I'm not being hyperbolic. And I'm sure that, Ireland and the UK and there's other countries have similar provisions in place. But really, this is very significant.
Ours is more of like it's called an unwritten or uncodified constitution. So it's sort of just like everything that built up over the past, I don't know, you could go back like 800 years. So it's not quite as like cut and clear as the US Constitution and the Bill of Rights. I mean, there's some people that think we should have that codified. I mean, I'm kind of more and more in favor of that as those rights become infringed upon more and more. But the kind of bigger picture of the Julian Assange case has been watching certain parts of the media almost cheer on or be pleased about his prosecution, and some parts of the media being like obviously horrified at the idea that a journalist can be prosecuted for printing the truth. Why do you think it is that we've got that split? Like, surely that should be something upon which the media is totally united. Like, that if you want to print the truth and you have the documents to prove it's the truth, that should be it. Like, why do you think there is that division?
Yeah, no, I actually know why there's that division. It's interesting because there's two types of talking heads. Okay. You've got journalists and reporters and investigative, people that are actually seeking information. And then you have state-sponsored propaganda. And state-sponsored propaganda, which is what most people watch, unfortunately, it's mainstream media. They are so willing to throw Julian Assange under the bus because it suits their corporate donors. I mean, we have 90% of our media is owned by about 5-6 for-profit corporations. All of those people probably hate Julian Assange. So this is something that is a witch hunt. It's been a witch hunt. So what you have is you'll have actual journalists, actual independent media people that are going to be very supportive of Julian Assange because they have no corporate donors that are not allowing them to go forward with this information. We've seen a total blackout of Julian Assange on mainstream media in general. You don't even see it. So they don't only, I mean, they ghost him, but they get too much corporate money. Those are not, we just have to distinguish between talking heads and journalists. And there's a very big distinction.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess like it becomes a case of like the corporate media versus sort of independent journalists. Like, not that there isn't like great journalists working in almost every organization, but like somewhere like CNN doesn't hire out investigative reporters and it's like a commentary like theater basically.
We stopped having, our mainstream media stopped having foreign correspondents after 9/11, but really it was when the first Iraq war with Bush Sr., where they were putting out this moratorium on coffins being shown coming back. And then under W, that was it. There was no, like, after 9/11, they wouldn't allow the media and to be seeing what's going on in the world. So we can keep everybody in this nice little bubble where they only are privy to what the state wants them to know. And so we don't have investigative reporters out there anymore. People who used to be on TV, Tom Brokaw, Dan Rather, like even that generation, which definitely was corporate, but those were still actual journalists. Someone like Dan Rather, he was an on-ground reporter in Vietnam. Like, we used to have that. And since 9/11, that is completely gone. And that's the problem. So the people that are telling us, they're only telling us what the Situation Room at the White House tells them to tell us. They're just stenographers of the establishment. They're not reporting anything.
Do you think that that's like entirely because they don't want you to see the things outside of the bubble? Or do you think there's like a financial incentive in there as well? It's much easier to just get the information from the White House like press team and not bother to send out an investigative reporter. Like, do you think?
No, they're banned. They're barred from it No, I not only do I
Really?
think that they're barred. Yeah, they don't. They're not. None of the mainstream outlets have on the ground reporting in any of the places that, like Syria, Iraq, any place where we're not going to look good. You'll never have somebody on the ground reporting from there anymore. It's just not how it works. All they'll do is they'll have some expert come on, or some spokesperson from the Pentagon, or whoever it is. But there is no field reporting anymore. And the kind of outlets that do field reporting, what's interesting is you get a completely different picture. Completely different. Max Blumenthal interviewed Maduro, and that is actual journalism. That's go and spend time in Venezuela, and that's reporting. That's investigative journalism. We don't get that in the mainstream whatsoever. We just get a talking point, a video clip that's been pre-approved, and then maybe some expert that was brought in by the corporate donor of that channel. That's basically all we get. And I think that ultimately, there's a huge financial incentive. Obviously, the elite people want to keep us as ignorant and fighting amongst ourselves as we possibly can, and create all sorts of stupid issues like whether or not transgender people can use bathrooms, and getting people riled up about nonsense to keep the working people from uniting together against the oligarchs. And so I generally look at what used to be the fourth estate as now it's just another arm of the oligarchy. And the actual fourth estate, which are the people out on the fringe, like the gray zone journalists and, like Abby Martin and Eva Bartlett. And you've got there are good journalists in the world, but they're kept from having the size platform that they would need to reach most people in this country. I can't, we are extremely bubbled and ignorant here, and I'm aware of that. So I can only speak in this country, and your average person in this country will watch CNN or MSNBC, and that's it. That's all they watch. And that's their base of information. And it is extremely Western, white, supremacist, imperialist based propaganda. Okay. But when you've been growing up in that, you don't notice it. It's gradual. And so really, I think they do it to keep everybody ignorant.
Why do you say it's white supremacist based propaganda before we go to something else? Like, whoa, yeah. Why do you say that?
Well, when I say that, I'm talking about just like this Western, Northern hemisphere thing where white is superior to dark, where the people in the dark brown countries are the ones that are terrorists and criminals, the people that have brown skin that are coming across the border that we have to be scared of. And so I think that our mainstream media continuously propagates, and at this point, it's so just run of the mill. Like, it's not even, these are not people coming out like, as Klan members wearing hoods and stuff, but it's just the subtlety of how they cover different people. And those people often happen to be of darker skin. And those people are often othered by our mainstream media. They're seen as wrongdoers, as terrorists, as savages. They can't get their own lives together. They'd all fight amongst themselves. They need us to save them. That entire mentality is, in my opinion, a very anti-dark skin. I'm not going to say anti-black because there's, a variety of shades, but it is. And that's our mainstream narrative.
I mean, I'm curious to like, do you think it's white supremacism, or do you think it's like almost like an American supremacism thing? Because I mean, it kind of clashes with what you were saying before about, because something that I really believe that you were saying earlier was about the sort of desire to have us fighting amongst ourselves. And whilst I definitely agree that like there's some news outlets and a lot of like vilification of, say, immigration or of people like refugees, especially like in the UK, for example, we had a lot of vilification of people fleeing across the Mediterranean from Syria when they're, when that doesn't seem like an easy option if you're going to consider like trying to come across the Med on a dinghy. But do you think it's solely like a white supremacism, or do you think it's kind of like stoking both sides of a fight, like you were saying with like culture war issues like the transgender bathrooms, or we've got the Meghan Markle Harry thing at the minute, or there's like in the UK there was a woman who was murdered by was on trial, going to trial for murder of a girl who he was a police officer, and there was a bunch of protests or candlelit vigils, as they described them, in London, and then the police came and sort of manhandled some girls who were at the vigil out of the way, and this is being like whipped up as like a battle for like men against women. So like from my perspective, it seems to be not like simply one like ideology, like the American or white supremacist ideology. It seems to be like this stirring up from every side where it means that we are divided and busy fighting our own stupid, like inconsequential battles instead of trying to like take down the establishment, essentially.
Yeah. I mean, that is definitely happening. But when I'm talking about like, this is all sort of fairly new to me in terms of like a lot of reading I've been doing, but in general, how we teach people and how we teach history, and this is globally, comes from a very colonial, imperialist view of the world. We're so indoctrinated with it that it is just, I'm not talking about the current situation of racial issues or misogyny issues, or that's all just a distraction. I'm talking about the big picture of Western civilization and how we are basically indoctrinated, both in how we are taught history and in how the media presents what's going on in the world. For example, if you were to ask the average person in this country, what are your thoughts about Venezuela? Okay. Their answer will likely be, oh, he's a socialist dictator and we have to help those people. And then if I were to say something to them like, well, what are your thoughts about the sanctions on the people of Venezuela? Oh, well, we have to do that because we need to have them be able to create a better system for themselves, or whatever their mainstream media talking points would be, right? So this is based on, and here's the clear division that we see in this country. So for example, in my district, we have a lot of Venezuelan people. They're white Venezuelans. They're wealthy generally, and they're white Venezuelans. Now, when you go to Venezuela and you talk to actual people in Venezuela, like somebody like Max Blumenthal or Aaron Mate or any of the journalists that actually do that, what you find is a completely different story. These are not people that want to be saved by us. They want to be left alone by us. The majority of people in Venezuela elected this person, and yet we wouldn't know that. And that is not the talking points we get. We get this, and it is to me like a very supremacist, like, we're going to come in. We get to decide how you govern, how you live, and we're coming in. Now we sell it to our people. We manufacture consent by making it be, we're helping them. We're bringing them democracy. We're saving them from this ruthless dictator. And I do not think it's a coincidence that every time that has happened historically, it is a dark-skinned nation. We don't go up to some place, I don't know, pick some small Slavic nation and just sort of like, go in there. This is because we can create a perception of this like white savior. And we're all so used to it. This is a global thing. And this is something that happens everywhere, even in Africa. Like, this is a global thing that we are indoctrinated in a white supremacy, patriarchal, like we are supposed to help the poor brown people. And that is how we sell all of these conflicts, at least in this country. Like, again, I can't speak as to like what how your media sells it, but here it is very patriarchal, very paternalistic, very, we have to help those poor people. And it's this constant portrayal of certain groups as lesser and other. And I do think that comes into play in terms of what we're willing to accept on foreign policy, what we're willing to forego as far as civil liberties to protect our safety because we're so scared of those people. I think that there is a very specific element because we started seeing it very heavily after 9/11, not just racially profiling African Americans. I mean, that's forever and a day old here. But now, and we just saw last night, apparently, we just had a massacre of 8 Asian women in Atlanta. So the hatred is deep, but it's, for the most part, perpetrated and accepted in this country by this perceived idea of, I believe, a white supremacy. globally.
It's awful. I didn't know about that shooting. I'll have to.
Oh, well, this is, our national news. It just happened last night. Some lunatic with a very anti-Asian, mindset drove around. I don't know how many parlors he hit, like the massage parlors, but ultimately killing 8 people. I think 6 of them were women that were working, and I don't know who the other 2 people were. But this is a hate crime. This is whatever nonsense our media is using to fuel people up to hate Asian people, like the China virus or whatever they're calling it. Like yeah. Yeah, that's what happened last night.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think they called it. Well, as far as I've seen, they haven't called it the China virus that much. They condemned
Trump did.
They condemned
Trump called it China virus.
Yeah, I mean, I have found it amusing the way that all of the variants can be from every other place, but the China virus thing is frowned upon. Like we can have the British variant or the Brazilian variant or the Nigerian variant. So I find it amusing the way that one thing, I don't know, there's something there that certain, you're not allowed to say it's from certain places, and it's interesting. But I want to get back to something you mentioned about journalists on the ground, because this is something where I can plug my book. That I was looking at in the book. I talked about this case of, it would have been 2017 when the UK chose to take part in bombing of Syria after alleged chemical attacks by Assad on his own people. Now there was very little material evidence that these chemical attacks had taken place. And Robert Fisk, who was an award-winning journalist for the Independent and a number of different outlets, who was on the ground there, said that there seemed to be no suggestion that these were chemical attacks. He thought perhaps they'd been staged, or essentially he found very little evidence for it. And yet the UK still went ahead with its the UK weren't alone, but we went ahead with bombing based on retaliation for chemical attacks, of which there didn't seem to be much material proof. And then the BBC, I wouldn't compare them to CNN; they're not quite that bad yet.
No.
I mean, we've had UK politicians calling for a fair, impartial news outlet like CNN in the UK, and I just seriously, I saw it, and it was Lord Andrew Adonis, who is meant to be a smart, well-engaged guy. Anyway, that's aside from the point. But the BBC then put out an article about the conspiracy theorists online spreading misinformation about the Syrian chemical attacks, and so it's it's almost like a machine where the establishment line gets pumped by the mainstream press, and then anytime that anyone comes in to try and question that through normal journalistic practices, it then gets shut down again by the media who were pushing the original line. It's how can you be trusted to fact check someone criticizing you?
Yeah, it's very problematic, and I always tell people you just got to follow the money. When if a media is owned by a corporation, that corporation is going to serve its special interests. And in fact, the sole purpose of a corporation, basically, most of these companies that we're talking about, is to serve their shareholders. Their sole purpose is profit. That's it. They don't care about anything else. They don't care about the facts. They don't care about the truth. They don't care about anything. They care about profit. That's it. And so when that is somebody's motivation, you always have to be suspicious of the quality of information that you're getting. That's without a doubt. So for me, I generally know that whatever is coming from mainstream media is just whatever the talking points at the Pentagon or the White House have put out. And that's it. You're not going to get any sort of research, reporting, investigation. You're not going to get that.
I mean, for anyone that's sitting here being well, how do corporations influence the media? They're a totally different thing. How would you explain how that relationship works and how they have an influence on the way the news is portrayed?
Yeah. So, for example, a lot of the same companies that are, let's say, I don't know, contractors, military industrial complex companies, right? Those same companies own media outlets. So those media outlets are not going to speak truth to power on military actions, on foreign policy. You're not going to get an unbiased view because their donors will shut that down. You're not going to get investigative reports on really good like alternative fuels and different things because the fossil fuel companies are advertisers, huge advertisers. Big Pharma is a huge advertiser on the station. So you're getting the control of both the person who owns the media organization and what's in their best interest, which I can assure you financially is not in our best interest. And then you also have the interests of their advertisers. And that's an extremely powerful thing. So when you have that in conjunction with those same advertisers, like whether it's big pharma or fossil fuels or the military industrial complex, those same donors also have lots of lobbyists and buy lots of Congress people. So it's this it's like a siege from every angle. They have taken over every branch of our government, all three branches of our government, and they have taken over the fourth estate. And it's just, we are an oligarchy. We are an oligarchy that has this sort of contrived appearance of a democracy that isn't real. And they are starting to get more and more fascist. And this has nothing to do with our political parties. This is global. This is happening globally. So in this country, we get distracted with the party nonsense and all of that. But all roads lead to the same thing, is infringement of civil liberties, grasping of more money and power by the elites and the oligarchs, and more people falling below a minimum standard of living, thereby losing more and more power. When you're struggling to live, you don't have time to be speaking truth to power. You're just trying to figure out how to feed your family. The more desperate people get, the more we'll fight amongst ourselves. It's like, it reminds me of like ancient things, like when you talk about like ancient civilizations and you look back on how they kept everything in order, this is how.
Yeah, I mean, like something that's always interesting is like when I have when I have discussions with people about things like this. Like I was talking to my brother about this recently, and he said, "Do you really think that this like crisis and moment is being used as a power grab, essentially, like to take more power from the people and give it to the power brokers who are already sort of over, like pockets running over with money and influence?" And he said, you're being crazy. Like they're just stupid, incompetent people. They're not actually like doing this. And I'm like, look, like show me a moment in history when governments all over the world have taken the powers that they're now taking and then given them back peacefully, like outside of wartime. And he was like, yeah, well, I don't know as much history. And I was like, look, I'm not like a big student of history, but I know these things happened in the past. And why do you think it is that people don't believe that, even though we have the entirety of human history to sort of take examples from some of the horrible dictators throughout the 20th century, of like clamping down, taking more power, becoming horrendously corrupt, and all of the problems that come along with that particular sort of scenario, and then don't think that it's possible now, like post 2000, everything was rosy and people weren't bad anymore. And why do you think that cognitive dissonance occurs where people don't think it can happen again?
Yeah. And this is really interesting. So I recently had Thom Hartmann. I don't know if you're familiar with Thom Hartmann on my show. He has a book about the history of American oligarchy. And this could probably be applied just globally. I mean, he's examining it American historically, but things happen in a 40-year cycle. And what's interesting, like when you look at, like in our country, it had to do with the oligarchs taking over during, after slavery, and then the fall again, and then the rise again. And like, it really examines how this happens. And it's almost like as soon as the people who are dead, who would remember it, it starts happening again. So it happens like it's really fascinating because I had never looked at it that way before, but I think that that's the case. And now with the fact that there is no fourth estate, it makes it so much easier to corral people. But there's a variety of things. Selective memory is definitely part of it. and the fact that we were never properly informed in the first place. A lot of things is, you see it hindsight, but I don't know your education system. Ours lacks very, very much. Ours is extremely lacking. So the history that we're taught, the history that is prioritized, is not the history that is going to be relevant in being able to overturn an oligarchy, right? That's not, they're not going to keep giving you that information. But everything is cyclical. People can only take so much before they rise up. Power will concede nothing. It never has. And unfortunately, things have to get violent. That's history. And this is where this is going. We're no different than, like, let's say the Roman Empire or any empire. They eventually use their money and their resources infinitely more to control and kill than to help their people. So when you spend more money on your military than you do on providing for your own citizens, it's only a matter of time before you're going to implode. So at some point there's more of us than there are of them. And then there's a revolution, and then that gets and like, it doesn't have to be like a violent revolution. Like, for example, FDR in our country, that was one example. The barons, the after the stock market crash, there was just this desperation and this need. And so he came in essentially to save capitalism. People thought that, he was providing a social thing. And yeah, but because he recognized that if we don't have consumers, because nobody can afford to buy anything and people can't afford to live, then the money's going to dry up. So he came in at that point and put higher taxes and created work programs and did those things. And that was one cycle. And then it built up and built up and built up, and the greed and the greed and the greed. And then we had what we had with the crash. What was the next? Was like, we're talking like Reagan era. When you started to see another complete control and relaxing of regulations and crushing of labor. And it's like, okay, did all those people from the 40s forget what happened when there were people didn't have a basic standard of living and what happened to this country? And so, yeah, I think people forget, but it is cyclical. And to think that it's not going to happen to us is extremely short-sighted.
Like, you brought up a couple of things I want to address there. The 40-year cycle is super interesting because I've been reading a little bit about this thing called Strauss-Howe intergenerational theory. So it attests that things happen in an 80 to 100-year cycle through 4 generations to about 20 to 25 years. So basically it says that, and I'm going to butcher this because my notes aren't in front of me about it, but so you have like the 4 stages, and they call them, they kind of almost call them the seasons of history, or refer to them as the seasons of history. So you have like the initial period. So in this case, that was like the war. It comes like just after the war, comes just after a crisis, and you have all the society like renewed in this like belief in the systems and the structures and the institutions, and it's about like the societal collective good. And then as you kind of progress through the generations, like individualism becomes more important than the institutions that were built, till you get to a point of unraveling and then crisis, and then it starts again. And normally in their theory anyway, that crisis ends in some sort of violent conflict. And it would suggest that the authors of the book from, I think in 1987, they predicted that sometime around 2020 or 2020 to 2025, that there would be like a serious period of violence or upheaval or revolution or something like that. But I am curious as to whether you think like violence is still what will come from this, because I'm also reading Steven Pinker's book, The Better Angels of Our Nature. That's it's a history of violence. So it's kind of tracking how, whilst we still have a lot of problems in the world today, that we live in the most peaceful time, at least like in the developed world, that has ever existed. Like, crime is lower, people live longer. It's just like a more peaceful and sort of placid time to live in. And there's some people that think violent conflict no longer works as a form of revolution, and that we're in this kind of like 5th generational warfare, like information war that's going on. Like, do you see like actual violence breaking out on the street, or like just mass protests, or do you think it's more likely to be some sort of like information war?
In my dream universe, I had this idea that the world is just one really smart hacker away from taking all the money from the haves and giving it to the have-nots. Like that the entire thing could ultimately be solved in a digital way. And that is how the revolution, like that's ultimately how the power shift will occur. But I think that the more desperate and angry people get, and again, I'm speaking as to this country, we don't have healthcare. We don't have a minimum wage that's livable. We have some issues that are pushing people into dire straits at mass amounts. The pandemic has obviously exponentially made everything worse. We're looking at probably about anywhere from 20 to 30 million homeless people that we're going to be dealing with relatively quickly as soon as the eviction moratorium is lifted. Those people will all owe back rent. And these people also don't get any health care. So when I hear things like that, and I know how desperate people are because I've seen it, I wonder, what wouldn't somebody do? What would I do if my kid needed a particular operation, but my health insurance company didn't cover it? And I live in a country where I have to go into bankruptcy in order to be able to afford my kid's surgery. And then I'm just living my whole life in debt and owing, and just that kind of desperation, I think, can lead people to do all sorts of things. I think that if you keep people kicking down and you're kicking down, I think that eventually people have had it. I think that violence, unfortunately, is the result of mass gatherings of people that are angry and desperate. I think that's inevitable. But I don't think that ultimately that's what's going to, like, I don't think storming the Capitol building is ultimately, like, in a physical sense, going to work. No. But I think that when you have so much violence around the world, and I know what you're saying, like, yes, in our countries, in a lot of the Western countries, the crime rates are down. Our violent crime rates are down here too. That is true. But we've seen surges in things like domestic violence, PTSD, suicides, all sorts of things that we've seen increases in that wouldn't be considered under the violent crime category necessarily, either unreported or whatever the case may be. But I always say that from our country's perspective, you cannot expect to be so violent abroad. We're drone bombing, I believe, 8 countries right now. Civilians, people. We've bombed the same Doctors Without Border hospital twice. So you cannot
hang on, back up a second.
Oh, that happened. What? Oh my God. This was in, I want to say it was in Yemen. And this was years ago, before people were even talking about it. And Eva Bartlett was on the ground there and had been talking with you got to look this up. It was amazing. And I can't remember what show I watched her talking about this on, but she was actually there the second time that same hospital got bombed. So she had heard that from the people there that it had happened prior. And then she was actually there for the second time. And when you're us and you're working and you're giving the technology and the power to people in Saudi Arabia to do this, okay, you're not going to tell me that that's an accident. You don't accidentally bomb the same hospital twice. So we're involved in all of this all around the world. And people in our country live in this little bubble because most people don't even know that that's going on. And yet it infiltrates everything about us. Why do we have such militarized police departments? What is that about? Right? Like, all of this comes from this just general, we are violent people. Humans are violent. No other species does that. Like, we are violent, and you cannot be colonialist, imperialist, violent people abroad and not have any violence at home. That's just, it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. Yeah. And so that's what people are going to start to realize here that don't know what we're doing overseas. And that's why there's this disconnect, because people, they just see it every once in a while. There's a protest that gets out of hand. They don't see the festering, bubbling nightmare that is produced by what we do abroad, either in creating people that hate us, like in Gaza, or whether it's from bombing people in Syria, or whatever it is that's causing people to flee and be desperate and have no means. And I think that you can only push people so far. I do.
Yeah. I think to that bubbling resentment, you can add destabilizing South American regimes and African regimes, and just sort of slowly further impoverishing the vast majority of people in America, and we have very similar conditions kind of unfolding here at home. And unfortunately, have you seen the Michael Moore documentary, Fahrenheit 9/11, the one about Trump after he was elected?
I didn't see that. I saw you mean 11/9?
11/9, sorry, Fahrenheit 11/9.
I saw the 9/11. Yeah, no, sorry, I didn't, Fahrenheit because I tried to avoid all things Trump. I just sort of felt comfortable with my knowledge that it was basically all crap, and I didn't need to know the details because watching him was disgusting to me. So, but yeah, please tell me.
Yeah, I mean, the documentary isn't so much about Trump as you think. It's actually more about the conditions that created him. But there's one moment that I rewatched it like fairly recently. It just came up on Netflix and I was bored waiting on a plane. And I was struck because there's this moment where Michael Moore cuts to the Republican primaries from 2015, and Trump is just standing there in his usual sort of way and it's just like, you're a liar and you lied to get us into Iraq and you lied, all of the Republican establishment standing there, and he's just standing there calling them liars in front of a crowd of die-hard Republicans, the party of the military and of theoretically of war, and he got a standing ovation for telling them that they lied to take them into a fake war. And at that point, I probably should have realized, have watching that in hindsight, I should have realized that was the moment he was going to win, because there would be no other candidate in the Republican Party who would dare to do that, and Trump got a standing ovation. And I think it taps into that there's probably a lot more resentment of war in both parties than is realized by the establishment, I think.
Yeah, look, it is clear, and I forget the most recent numbers on this. The majority of people here want to get out of all of those foreign regime wars that we're in, the regime change wars. The majority of people, I forget what the number is, but it's clear, if we had a referendum on it, we'd be bringing everybody home. So, but I don't think that the people really see what those things look like. They don't see what's going on in a place like Yemen. Or what we're doing to facilitate the misery and abuse of people. And so, when you don't see that, I think it's kind of easy to just live in your little bubble and everything's okay. I think it's very telling, and it really does go to what we're talking about the media and how we're not getting that accurate information. For me, if I hear something about Syria, I know that I'm going to go research the sources that I know are most knowledgeable about Syria. I'm going to go, I have a list I keep of different journalists with their kind of areas of expertise. And, but that requires so much effort. Most people don't know to even do that. So they don't even know that this is all going on. But when you present them with the information, most people don't want to be doing those things. Most people don't want to be spending our money on an overinflated military of offense. We're not the Department of Defense. We have the Department of Offense. Who are we defending ourselves from? Who is a threat to us? And I think more people are starting to realize that, especially from a financial perspective, in terms of how much of our money goes into our military budget. But yeah, I think most people don't want that, even on any side. And one of the endearing things about Trump when he first went in was he was talking anti-war. He was giving a very populist message, a very pro-labor anti-war message. He did none of those things, mind you. Wow. Once he got there, the deep state and the CIA and the Department of Homeland Security and all those people were whispering in his ear, and he's like, oh, okay. So, that was a wash. But yeah, people want to be done with this, not to mention it's personal for people. They have people that are dying in conflicts that don't need to be existing, so it's a massive problem.
Do you think social media has made us lazy in trying to find good journalism? We just sort of open an app and it's all there, the latest news. And whereas before, if you want to find out about something, you kind of had you did at least search it out a little more than you do now. Do you think that's made us lazy?
Yeah, I think it's sort of a blessing and a curse, because while yes, I do think it's made people rely on other people's information, sort of more secondhand social media information, which is not ideal. More people are being brought into the fold of even being aware of what is going on. So, you kind of just got to look at the odds. I mean, you want most people to know what's going on. And there's a little bit of hope that they'll get it from the best information source, but they probably won't, but we're still better off with people being aware. So I think that without social media, a lot of our like independent news sources wouldn't be able to get any attention because we're so blacked out from the mainstream and from information. So social media, while allows a certain amount of laziness, also allows platforms like mine or yours to have a voice where we wouldn't. So it's good and bad. It needs to be a utility. It needs to be a nationalized utility, and then that would just be, and then we would solve the whole dilemma with it.
You think that would help?
Oh yeah, I know.
Like, I mean, I'm skeptical, just because I don't feel like giving the another ring of the establishment another method of control is a great idea.
They have it anyway.
Well,
they already do. They already control it. They just control it through those oligarchs. But the problem is when you do it that way, then we don't have First Amendment rights because it's a private company. So
could you not better legislate for that rather than say, like, right, imagine Trump runs in 2024.
Well, you can, but this also has to do with the idea of broadband for everybody and access to information, and that this really is our public forum now. So you're sort of saying like that this is the equivalent of the public square in front of City Hall, because that's really what we see now. It is. And so, yeah, that needs to be public domain. And then it becomes nobody can infringe your rights to speech, blah, blah, blah. The reason they keep it the way it is because they're essentially able to control our speech without it being a violation of the Constitution. So they work in conjunction with Google and Facebook and Amazon and all of these things to keep us completely suppressed. And we really have no recourse because they're private companies. So it's, I see the suspicion, but we're already getting nationalized propaganda talking points. The only difference is there's oligarchs in the middle that are profiting from it. So we're sort of, it's 6 of one, half a dozen the other in terms of what I would consider accurate information, but it gives us recourse for violation of our civil liberties.
I mean, I guess I'm not sold on the nationalizing idea, because it's like, would you nationalize CNN to make them a more reliable outlet?
No, but that's not a platform.
Well,
CNN isn't a platform. CNN is a publisher. I'm talking about public forums like Facebook and Twitter and YouTube and those that are just platforms. And those platforms get to censor because they're private companies and that they're not subjected to our constitutional rights. And so those things, no, not publishers, not like MSNBC or any of those those are whatever. I'm talking about public forums that is where people are being most censored right now.
Yeah. I mean, Twitter and Facebook are on a serious
and YouTube.
YouTube as well. I mean, I already had a video flagged for talking about something that was in a legitimate. Exactly. It was in an actual like article. I sent them the article and they didn't even like consider the appeal.
See, if that were a public forum, they couldn't get away with that. That's what I'm talking about. It gives the control back to us in terms of asserting our civil liberties that right now we don't have. Right now, we're just a captive audience to the oligarchs that are answering to the government anyway.
Would you be in favor of like the idea of a digital bill of rights to kind of codify some like rights like the original Bill of Rights, but like online?
Absolutely. And I also think that we need to address the issue of our private information and the sharing of our private information. And that's also part of it that needs to be addressed. When you're talking about digital rights, is our right to protect our private information. This is not something I am an expert on. I don't completely understand the whole thing, so I just defer. But Andrew Yang, who is a friend, this is one of his biggest issues about protecting privacy and giving you the benefit to profit from your own information. So in other words, if Google is going to sell your information to whoever to be marketing, okay, well, that's fine, but I'm getting a cut. Where's my dividend? That's my information. So it's ownership of your information. I don't completely understand it technologically. You'll have to look into it, but that is the kind of thing that matters a lot to me as well.
I mean, this is great. This is a great plug again for my book, because this is like the opening chapter of my book is all about how our data is being hoovered up. And essentially, it's not as much like the actual ownership of it. It's like the copying of what we give them, and then the use and then licensing of that data as part of their advertising product. And as part of, like, something I like to remind people as well is, if we just like if Facebook did not have our data, it would be worthless, essentially. That we literally are the ones that have made it the most valuable company in the history of the world. I think, as far as I'm aware, I'll have to check that, but $800 billion is nothing to be laughed at. They're more powerful than most small to medium sized countries. And essentially it's the use of our personal data, because the more they understand about both us and how we use their platforms, the more they can use it to sell us products, sell us ideas, and predict and understand our behavior to keep us theoretically more under control and in the lanes that they believe we should be in. And clamping down on speech is a huge part of that, because as soon as there's things that you can't say, then you're censoring yourself a little bit, and you're just a little bit scared to say something. And it doesn't have to be like a big thing. Like they say, you definitely can't say any of these things. They just have to like ban one or two people for a couple of small things, and then everyone gets worried to talk about it. Yeah. I
mean, look, there's all different tactics of suppression. They generally, I am the person that thinks that when it comes to anything, you throw enough shit against the wall, something's going to stick. So I am in favor of many tactics, and they are doing the same. So we're seeing it from several different angles. And it could be as simple as like on YouTube, I know Jamarl Thomas's channel got taken down, Graham Elwood's channel got taken down. And maybe what they do is they suspend their channel for like, a couple of weeks or a month. Well, that's their livelihood. These are paid content creators. That's their livelihood that they're messing with. And then even if they put it back up, are we considering the loss that they had in that time, not to mention the loss of subscribers from them being absent for however long? So it is very suppressing. It's sort of making people start over from scratch anytime they build up a certain amount of platform. And that's what it's about. It's about knocking your platform out from under you so that you're not capable of speaking truth to power. And look, this has been going on forever. This isn't new. It's just that now we have all these different types of platforms that we have. So we're just seeing it more. But yeah, this is par for the course. I want to say there was like a handful of our progressive shows were taken down and flagged within the past since Biden has taken office.
Yeah, Jimmy Dore did a great bit about it and kind of listed through them. I can't remember the exact names of the shows, but I'll link the Jimmy Dore.
Yeah, there's a few of them. And I know I'd had Jamarl Thomas on my show. He was one of the ones that got taken down. And this has been happening for a long time. Like, this isn't new. It's just you're seeing it more condensed maybe, or more at the same time. But people have been fighting these things and blocks and having your stuff flagged and all of this stuff. We've been fighting this forever. I got flagged by Facebook for using the word biatch, B-E-Y-O-T-C-H. Oh yeah. And
you could have just misspelled beach.
I could have, but even if I said, but I'm a pretty First Amendment absolutist. And I really am. I'm a First Amendment absolutist, with the exception of screaming fire in a building, or, calling for imminent threat and harm to somebody. But for the most part, I think we need to let everybody say what they want. And unfortunately, people will get wrong information. That's part of life. The best way to counter it with good information, not taking away the other information. And I also think when we do that, that is part of why we keep repeating the same things historically, is because we keep suppressing historically the information that is ugly and that we don't want people to see. And so 20 years from now, 40 years from now, those things won't be there because those had been suppressed. Those videos had been taken down. Those videos were flagged. They'll fall away. And then we sort of whitewash our history, and it just continues over and over again. So, I mean, suppression of this has been going on since the earliest days of journalism.
You really think that's the case, that like if we were all better educated in history and the abuses of government throughout history, that we would be less likely to become victims of it again? Just because, yeah. Like, do you think that's the case?
I think that if a book like Howard Zinn's People's History of the United States was our textbooks, and we looked at things from the viewpoint of the conquered and not from the conquerors, I think that would change our perspective on everything. Imagine if our school children were raised as if they were educated by the conquered. Imagine what the mindset would be. I think that changes everything. And it permeates everything, because then as we get older, we just keep perpetuating these same, they're like myths. They're myths. We're not taught valid history. We're taught myths and vignettes, like this hero, this person, but we don't learn about what really happened, because a lot of what was really happening was suppressed at the time as well. When you could even go back to, have you seen Oliver Stone's The Untold History of the United States? I think it's on Netflix.
I haven't. No,
okay, it's like a three. Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing. And it really, like, honestly, you watch that, it'll be like, at least from our, and it's just our country in this, it goes back to how William Wallace was supposed to be Roosevelt's vice president, and how the Democrats pulled the rug out from under him. And that led us to having Truman as president. Truman should have never even been president. So there's like this chain of events, and it all starts with the same kind of shenanigans that we've seen since we've been watching since 2016. The same kind of like party shenanigans has been going on forever. This isn't new. And yet you would think that this is all new information. Like when Julian Assange released the information about what was going on in the 2016 election, people were like aghast. And yet it happened before. So I was never taught that. And I'm not saying that had I been taught the story about that everything would be different, but just in general, the information that doesn't serve the elites is left out of history. And that's just how it is. So that we can't learn from our mistakes because we don't learn our mistakes.
I mean, what would you say to some people who kind of like hear the talk about like educating people about like our in the UK or the US, like the history of colonialism or the abuses of government? Like some people would hear that and immediately think like they're trying to like instill our children with like white guilt or like guilt for the actions of like their forefathers. And like I am quite a big believer in like the children shouldn't be punished for the sins of the parents.
That's true.
And so like, yeah, what would be your response if someone went, oh, you're just trying to teach them to hate America?
Yeah, no. I'm wanting to make this country better. You know what I mean? It has nothing to do with hating this country. It's about wanting to make it better in a place that serves everybody. And I can only really speak as to our history. So I don't, and our history regarding the African-American experience and what that is. And no, I don't think people should walk around feeling guilty. I don't feel guilty. I didn't do anything to anybody. However, there is not a person in this country that is not a beneficiary of slavery. Not one. All of us are beneficiaries of slavery. Slavery built our entire infrastructure. Slavery created the mass amounts of wealth and profit that we see that have continued as generational wealth in our oligarchs now. None of that would have existed without slavery and or the abusing of the indigenous people who were here first. None of it. So whether or not you did it, I didn't do it. I didn't enslave anybody. My family were poor Jews from Russia that escaped persecution, and my people didn't own anybody, right? Like not that, but yet I am a white person born in a pretty privileged situation in this country that is a beneficiary of that system. Okay. Mm-hmm. So when I talk about things like reparations, it isn't about that I'm being punished or I should feel guilty. It's about recognizing that our system that has created the life that I have is the same system. And that life is a result of the persecution of other people. And it's not one-on-one. It's not, I've never done anything like that would, persecute anybody, but to not recognize the privilege of being a beneficiary of it is extremely ignorant. And so if you were to even break it down financially, seriously, the amount of money that would be owed, there is a number. Somebody did figure it out as far as descendants of American slaves, like what their wealth, their generational and family wealth would be had they been compensated all along. And so there is a number. I mean, it's a number that's never going to get paid. But you can't ignore that and think that things can just be okay. It's having a massive debt that you owe. And you're never going to be able to pay it off because it's impossible to pay it off. And so the best you can do is say to the person that you owe, what can I do to restore this? What can I do to make this as good as I can going forward? What can I do to contribute to the solution? So I don't have guilt, and I don't think people should have guilt. I think people need to have awareness. And if you don't recognize and this is not to say there's not poor white people. I know lots of poor white people. It's just to say that they weren't also disadvantaged by being Black. Okay. It isn't saying that white people, look, you can go into parts of West Virginia and there are some poverty-stricken white people that live horribly. I mean, this is not, but they didn't have the added discrimination of being Black, and they didn't have the added burden of being redlined from certain neighborhoods, and they didn't have the added burden of not being able to vote for a really long time, having their towns burnt down. It's not just one thing. It isn't just slavery, right? It's a history, and that's something where I can only speak as to here.
Yeah, no, I get what you mean. I mean, I'm not personally a fan of the idea of reparations. I spent 7 years in school studying history, and 6 of those years, or maybe even all of them, we did at least some portion on the Nazis. And it's forever ingrained in my mind that reparations was one of the reasons ultimately that the Nazis came to power, was because it creates resentment. There's a lot of investment and things you could do to help communities without well, that's what reparations is. It doesn't have to be individual payments. It could be individual payments as well. It could be a tax deduction. It could be a lot of things. There's a myriad of ways to figure out how to make it right for people and level our playing field. But when I think reparations, what I think is a massive endowment of money that is available to these communities to use as they see fit to bring themselves up. And this is by Marianne Williamson's, I love her plan on reparations. I sort of adopted Marianne Williamson's plan that was in her campaign. And it was brilliant. And it really has to do with an endowment and an infrastructure investment and all of these things in communities, allowing them to dictate how to help them, as opposed to us coming in and saying, here's what we're going to do for you. See, that doesn't work. Well, that we could definitely agree on. I mean, top down, if you want to, I think if you want to rebuild America, you probably start at community level and let them sort themselves out. It's probably the best way to move forward. That's definitely my thoughts anyway. But
yeah, that's what we do.
Yeah. So how can people start, say they're getting real wind up and inspired here listening to you talk, what can they do, or what are the first steps we need to take to try and rectify some of the problems we've talked about here?
Yeah. The first thing I always tell people is to figure out what issues matter most to you, whether it's healthcare, the environment, police brutality, what are the issues that really matter most to you? And then I would suggest getting involved with organizations that cater to those interests. So for example, if you're really interested in the environment here, the Sunrise Movement is great. There's all different organizations. And the reason I like that is it keeps you in the loop. It mobilizes a people of like-minded. I always say it's great for somebody to have a vision, but when multiple people share a vision, then you have a mission. And so I think that is a key thing, that you need to find your people so that you can work on a mission. And it could be a bunch of different things. I also think it's important for people to pay attention to their local politics, know who their city commissioners are, their local representatives, and just be aware. Be aware of who the power players are. Be aware of what's going on legislatively. I don't think that electoral politics is the be all end all by any means, but I think that it does exist. And it benefits us to be as educated about it as possible, because ultimately we have to navigate that to seek our mission. So like, it's both aspects are important. But yeah, I think that people need to get involved with other people that are on their same page, and that will lead you to what would best serve that. And that's, everything's a contribution. That's what I think.
Well, that feels like a nice positive note on which to end things. Jen, thanks very much. Everyone go check out her podcast, JENerational Change. I will put the link in.
I got to plug my live stream on Saturday.
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, so Saturday, March 20th, 1:30 to 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We did it on the earlier end to accommodate people over where you are, so that it wouldn't be the middle of the night. And this is a free Assange forum. I will be hosting, Katie Halper and I are co-hosting multiple panels throughout the day. We're not only going to be talking about Julian Assange, but the goal is to bring in viewership and promote both a script that we have. We want people to be calling their legislators, calling our Department of Justice, and imploring them to drop the case against Julian Assange. We want to flood them with phone calls and emails. So this is sort of like it's a telethon type of thing, with the sole purpose of educating as many people as possible about what's going on with Julian Assange. So we'll be discussing different things. Like, we're going to have some talk on foreign relations. We'll talk a little bit about independent media. Like, it'll, depending on which panel, which hour, we have an entire program is on my page. JENerationalChange.com. You could check that out. We are also Spotify, iTunes, and YouTube. And check out our podcast. And you could follow us on social media at JenFL23. That's Twitter and Instagram. And on Facebook, I'm Jen Perelman.
Fantastic. I will put links for everything there in the description below. So yeah, Jen, thanks a lot. It's been a real pleasure.
Absolutely. Bye.
Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, follow me on Twitter, or sign up to our mailing list. Thanks a lot to our sponsor, ExpressVPN, the #1 most trusted VPN. Get lightning fast connectivity with servers in 160 locations across 94 countries. Keep your browsing privacy safe with ExpressVPN, and get a 35% discount on 12 months of ExpressVPN when you follow the link in the description below. Don't forget, my book is now out and available to order on Amazon and on bookshop.org. That's Brexit, the Establishment Civil War. And most importantly, thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.